It's actually a friend of mine who was an Iranian philosopher who was locked up by the regime, the current regime. They locked him up in prison in 2006. He was very lucky because his mother and his wife somehow managed to get him out, and then he wrote a book about his experience in that. So I wrote a script which is a thriller. With every film, actually, you learn new stuff and you become more efficient. I was doing all three professions basically: writing, directing, and producing.
Manu, welcome to the World XP podcast. How are you today, sir?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to do a quick intro for the people? Tell them who you are and what you do?
Yes, I'm a filmmaker. I'm a script writer, director, producer. And I make two kinds of films. I make films which are about architecture and cities and urbanism. And those are basically documentaries. And then I do fiction. And in fiction, I've written a thriller, but I've also done rom-coms. I'm right now doing a science fiction. I love fiction and documentaries, and especially on design, architecture, and all that.
Very nice. Let me pull up the question from the last guest before I forget because I pulled up the question from the wrong person. Oh, here it
Ah,
is. Okay, I've got it. What's the best advice that you have ignored?
what's the best advice I've ignored?
Yeah.
That's what we call a googly for those who play cricket. I don't know if in the US you play cricket, but in India, some of us do play cricket. It's a British colonial hangover. It's a kind of a ball which kind of turns in a very strange way. So it's difficult to play. Anyway, so the question is, what is the advice people have given that I haven't followed? Can you please
Yeah.
repeat it?
Yeah, it's like what's the best piece of advice that you ignored? And then like later you're like, "Oh, I should have done that," or "I should have listened to that person."
I usually don't listen to anyone. That's my problem. No, seriously speaking, I don't know. I really don't know what kind of advice. The thing is that people kind of give you advice based on their either their experience or what is their let's say the norms that they think they should follow, and that might not fit in with exactly what you want to do. And sometimes I feel that it's best to follow one's own beat and to do what one really feels like. And then you make your mistakes and then you learn from your mistakes and move on. Of course, so I've like probably a lot of people have done a lot of dumb things and made a lot of mistakes, and you know, but the satisfaction of at least following one's path and doing what one feels like doing in life is, I think, worth. That's the advice I would give someone.
Yeah, fair enough.
But
Fair
you don't
enough.
have to follow it. You might.
So, um, I want to start a little bit in kind of how you grew up because as I was informed and as we were talking before, it's a little bit of an interesting situation that you've got a father who's Indian and who's a famous architect and then a mother who's French. And so it's a little bit of I guess an anomaly in both places. So do you want to talk through a little bit of that and how that influenced your want or your desire to get into filmmaking, and then also you've done some documentaries on the architecture piece, which I'm sure was influenced heavily by being around your dad. So do you want to talk about kind of how you grew up
Sure.
and those sorts of things?
Sure. I was born in India and I grew up in India, and I studied in Delhi, which is the Indian capital. And but I because my mother is French and my parents met after the Second World War in London, and so and then they kind of settled in New Delhi. I've been navigating the two worlds, France and India, which are really very different culturally, but surprisingly, in some ways, are also similar. And the basic human thing is common, I think, across all uh, humanity, wherever it may be. And the cultural elements, of course, they add, there are different ways. Sometimes there's a lot of misunderstanding. And that's a very potent uh, thing for a filmmaker or a creative person, because I love comedy, and in comedy misunderstandings are like the basic one of the basic ingredients. So one of the films I'm trying to do right now is, I mean, I'm trying to get money for, because I've already written the script, is a Franco-Indian love story. And so it's a love story which involves a lot of cultural misunderstandings, and the norms are different, and but there's a fundamental human reality which is the same everywhere. Everywhere people fall in love, everywhere we have the same weaknesses, and therefore a lot of source of fun in the films. So yeah, so I've been, living between these two worlds. I've been, even to this day, I mean, part of my family is in Paris and part of it is in India. My parents are still live over there, so I kind of move between the two. And so that's like part of who I am, basically.
Yeah.
um,
How did you learn to navigate that as a kid? Because I can imagine even like when I was a kid and we had different cultures or different like friends from different cultures, and it's like, okay, we're going to the birthday party at so and so's house and you're 8 and you are used to things a certain way and you just act in that way, and then it's taboo or maybe frowned upon in another culture, and sometimes you have to learn the hard way, as you were talking before. How did you navigate that as a kid? Because like for me and for other people listening, maybe you had that experience like once or twice and you learned from it, but for you it would have been constant going back and forth. So how did you learn to navigate that?
Well, in India, and especially in Delhi, where I grew up, people come from actually very different cultures, because India itself is a mix of very different cultures, and you have like 30 official languages. India is actually like Europe. So, each region of India has its own language, its own culture, like a different European country. So I grew up in India, where everybody is practically speaking at least two languages, and coming from different parts of India. And I was a little different in the sense that I was partly French, and but it was never a problem as a kid. Honestly, the only thing was that when I went to France, I was that was much more that was a different place for me, because I was growing up in India. And so I had to, and I could hardly, I mean, I could manage French, but it was not, I wasn't fluent like I am today. And therefore I had to kind of play along as a kid. I probably always acted as if I understood everything, and I didn't. And so they, but family and all was pretty, they were pretty cool. And so it wasn't really an issue as a kid. It's later on as a filmmaker, that's when things became much more tough, because the business is very different. The industry is totally different. It's organized differently. It's That's where it was much more difficult. And paradoxically, at a time where I could speak the language, I could I understand every. I mean, maybe I miss some of the nuances in France, which I'd get more easily in India because I grew up over there. But it's tougher in the adult world than in the child world.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Where did the interest in film come from? Were you around it as a kid, or did it come from the want to be doing documentaries around the architecture, which is what you were exposed to from your dad? Or like how did that interest come up for you?
Well, at some movies are like a complete obsession in India, and I think they are everywhere in the world. I think they are very much in the US also. A lot of my American friends are pretty movie crazy, and it is one of the arts of the 20th century, and probably I was always interested in movies, but to take it up as a profession really came up when I went to boarding school in the south of France at the end of my schooling. And suddenly there was a girl over there who kind of, we were talking about, I was interested in biology. I was a very good student in only in biology. In other subjects I was not so good, but biology I was good, and that's what I wanted to do. But she kind of opened my eyes. She said that, I want to do film. And so I said, oh, that's interesting. I never even thought about it. And then suddenly I started reading books about it, and the more I read about it, and the more, of course, movies I was watching all the time anyway, the more I got interested in it. And then I moved to Paris after that. That was boarding school in the south of France. After that, I moved to Paris, and Paris is even today the world capital for watching movies, because you can see films from any period in the history of cinema. You see films from all over the world. Of course, Hollywood films are there, but you also see, Japanese films and Indian films and African films and, Spanish films. And I just saw a fabulous Italian film day before yesterday. I mean, it's a fabulous place. So, you're in a city which is movie friendly, and
Mm,
so that's how I got into it. And then I read all about Orson Welles, and saw his films, and he had just died when I reached Paris, and I started reading about him, and I was really fascinated by his work and what he had done. And I love Shakespeare, so it's one thing leads to the other kind of thing.
mm. So how do you, well, I'll, there's two questions in this, but one is how do you break into the industry? Because at least in the US, from what people know, I'll say the entertainment industry more broadly, there's a lot of gatekeeping. There's a lot of you have to know somebody to get a chance, which is kind of true in any industry. But um, uh, so how do you break in? And I'll caveat that with in like Netflix and streaming and YouTube and stuff has kind of opened a little bit of that up. But then the second part of that question is there's a lot of roles within the movie industry, you actor, scriptwriter, director, producer, like all these things. How did you kind of navigate breaking into the industry and then settle on a path that you wanted to go down?
Well, I was always only basically interested in directing. And directing, I thought, was very interesting because my father's an architect, and directing an architect is a kind of a similar kind of a profession, because the architect is the guy who kind of conceives the whole building, and director is also somebody who kind of translates a script on makes it visual, and he's a bit the captain of the team, so for the whole creative team. And both architecture and film are collective creative creations. A film is not made by one person, it's a whole teamwork. And but you need to have, I believe that for a film to be really great, you need to have a director, somebody who has a vision, which and I think it's the same thing for a building. For it to be a great building which remains in people's minds and influences the way people think and behave and all that, I think you need to have one person or maybe two, sometimes like the Coen brothers, for example, but they function like one person basically. Basically, you need one vision which kind of models everything around the film so that it serves that vision. And all the whole creative team, everyone works together to achieve that. So that's the how does one break into it?
Hmm.
Frankly, there's no formula to it. For I think it's always as a director, the best way is to make films, make short films, make whatever you can, make anything you can, practice. That's the most difficult thing about movies is that it costs a lot of money. Though nowadays, because of the new, when I was starting off, it was much more expensive to actually even make a film because we now with a good iPhone or a phone, a smartphone, you can shoot with your friends. You can actually all the editing equipment, everything is available for relatively cheap, and you can do it and you can practice. And I think that's the best way to actually keep making stuff.
So for you, I guess what was the first spark or the first one that you wanted to make? Like how did you gather the people to like this is so it's your first one as a director. You have to convince people that want to act and want to help you and do all these things. And you're like, yeah, I've never done this before, but please come help me. And I don't have that much money, so can you help me out? And like the first one, how did it work? And what kind of team like would you assemble? Because obviously, when you're on a big film or a feature film, you've got all these people running around. But for your first one or first couple, like how do you go about finding people? How do you figure out if they're even good fits for your vision, right? Because you still have a vision that you want to kind of portray in the film, but you need people that kind of fit that as well. And also, when it's your first one, you can't really be picky because there might not be that many people. So how did that work for you?
Well, I didn't start off by making a fiction film, though fiction was my first love. I started making documentaries when I came back. I studied film. I studied film first in France. I did a university. I did the Sorbonne University, and then after that, I went to NYU where I studied. I did a short course. I didn't do the big one. I did a small, very technical, hands-on thing, which is the continuing education NYU course, which I knew that Spike Lee had done, and so I thought that's the good one. And it was only 4 months. I think it still exists, and I would really recommend that for anyone in the US because it's a very short course. It's not too expensive, and you learn all the technical things you need to know in order to make a film. And so I really enjoyed that. And they're really, I mean, it was the complete opposite of the French approach, which is very theoretical in a university where, you learn semiotics and all kinds of theoretical things and history and all, which is good to know. But if you actually want to make stuff, I thought the American approach was really good because they gave the first thing they did was they gave you a camera, they gave you a roll. In those days, it was actually still film, celluloid, and you had four guys whom you didn't know, or a girl you didn't know, and the five of you went in Manhattan and started shooting, and then you came back with what you had done, and then you analyzed with the teacher. So that was really very hands-on, practical thing. And so when I came back to India after doing all that, you have to earn a living. So my dad kind of he needed stuff to promote his work. So I said, okay, I'll make a film on your work. So that's how I started off, and I hired a established cameraman. I had some money because of my dad gave the money for making the film on his work, so I could get a proper good cameraman to work with me, and I learned a lot from him. And I worked with all the technicians I could hire and all that, and slowly I started then making films for his clients. Then I made a whole series for Indian television. So that was in the 90s. And so it was learning experience during all this time, during till 2000. I was basically just making these architecture city design based documentaries, and I was working with lots of technicians, learning from everyone. The whole process was learning. With every film, actually, you learn new stuff and you become more efficient. I was doing all three professions, basically writing, directing, and producing. And it's good to start small, because then you don't get you can't do a bigger film anyway. You'll never get the money. So anyway, you have to start small. So but it's good, because then you make your mistakes, you learn from them, and technically you become better and better. And at one point, I decided that, look, I've made enough. I'd made at that point probably 10 films or 12 films. One of them had been, I mean, a few of them had been quite successful in terms of festivals, and I had gotten a few awards, and there was some recognition, not much money, but some recognition. And so I said, let me jump into the big pool to make a feature film. So
Okay.
then
Before
I,
before
yeah,
we get to that, how does a documentary come together? Like, because for me, when I watch one on like National Geographic or whatever, I'm like, okay, they want to tell us about the penguins or whatever it is.
right, right.
So you're like, you have your idea, which is I need to show my dad's work. But then how does that actually come together from the vision of like, I need to promote this to like, okay, we need to film this, we need to film that, the writing has to show this. Like how does that process work? And what are some of the things that you learned along the way from like the first one to the 10th or 12th one like you mentioned? Because like I'm just very curious about the whole documentary process because for me it's like you just go and you shoot it and then it's like okay, here's the building. But like obviously there's a lot more that goes into it than that. So like how does your brain work as you're formulating for what you want to show?
Well, I'm very curious. I mean, I had grown up in a household of my father, who's an architect, and therefore I had traveled to many of the places on which I later made films, which are these masterpieces of Indian architecture over the centuries. So palaces and city complexes and things like that. And so I knew I had been there, but obviously I did not know much about them. And then, so first, when I started making, let's say, my first film on my father's work, suddenly yeah, I had to read all about him, about everything that had been. I read every book that had been written about his work, and then I, of course, went to each place that he wanted me to shoot, and looked at how photographers and other people had represented his work. And then you I wrote a kind of a script, and then based on that, the advantage of a building is, it's an advantage and a disadvantage, is that the building doesn't it's not like a human being. It doesn't move around too much. It's there, so you can go a number of times and check it out. And the but the sun moves, so according to how the light happens inside. And architecture is all about volumes, space, and light, and the function of a particular building. So I had to read about and understand first what is architecture. So I spent a lot of time reading. I had not studied architecture. I had studied art, history of art, but not really architecture. So I had to educate myself first. And then and at the same time, I was going to these places and having a look at them and trying to understand. And then, of course, my father would also explain to me certain things and say that, if you shoot it from here, it'll look like this. But I'm very kind of independent. So I kind of said, okay, now you've told me what you want, but let me do my thing. So I then kind of made a film, which I think now is it was my first film. It's called Resonance. And it's about the resonance in his work of the past of Indian architecture, how he's translated the past into a modern contemporary language, using modern technology, modern materials, and how that has been the ancient, let's say, ancient or medieval or older past architecture of India, how he's taken lessons from those and translated it into a modern language, design language. So I kind of learned all that and tried to translate it on film and find the equivalent, let's say, a metaphor which can reflect that idea. So in this film Resonance, what I did was I did dissolves. Dissolves have been used traditionally in film when you go in the past. Let's say you do a flashback, there's a dissolve. In the old, nowadays you can just go straight to the past and the audience catches on. But in the old days, you needed to do a dissolve to indicate that now we are going into the past to understand what happens in the backstory of the character. So I use that idea of a dissolve to show buildings from the past and compare them with what he did in the present, because that was one of his fundamental concepts, how to kind of learn from the past but not be a prisoner of the past, to find something in the present. In our present circumstances, we don't repeat. If they made cathedrals like this today, we don't. Frank Lloyd Wright did not make cathedrals like that. He made it in a modern language. So with the new technology and all that, glass and steel and concrete and all that. So similarly, so that was the idea, that was his concept, and so I had to find a way to translate that on film. And I had a lot of fun doing it. And even though I had chosen to do film and not architecture, which everyone expected in my family, because all my cousins, my brother, everybody was an architect except for me. But then I ended up making films on architecture. So sometimes you can't escape your inheritance.
Yeah. So how do you go about writing a script for that?
Well, I have a very intuitive process. I kind of first I try to understand what the in this any building. If I'm doing a documentary film, it's very different when you're doing documentary and fiction. I love both of them, and they're very different. Documentary, I kind of study what exists because it's there. The building is there. What was the process followed by the architect or the people who designed that building? Sometimes it can be an old palace, so you don't know who the architect was, but you know the final result, and you analyze it and you try and understand. Oh, so it was a palace, this was the place where the king was meeting the ministers. And and there are things historians have written about it. So I would take anecdotes, because my aim is to talk about architecture and design to a larger audience, not to a very restricted group of designers or architects, because film is for me a more popular medium. It's how to convey maybe sometimes complicated ideas, but in a simple way, so everyone gets it. And usually, the professional academics use a lot of jargon, and personally, I think that it does not. It's basically is useless. It actually complicates things more than it should. So I try to simplify and I think, I mean, I write in English, even though I also write in French, but English is my first language. And so I think the English language has enough resources to avoid jargon. So yeah, so I simplify everything, try and even a complex idea can be simplified into smaller pieces, and so everyone can understand it. And so the idea is to do that and tell anecdotes which make it more lively and living and interesting, for because storytelling is at the heart of filmmaking, even documentary filmmaking. Uh,
Mm.
Unless you have some kind of anecdotes and stories, people get bored quite quickly, and
Yeah.
that is something to be avoided.
Especially now with phones and everything. I saw I think it was Matt Damon and Ben Affleck were on Joe Rogan's show and they were saying that now when they're making films they have to say the plot like four times because people are on their phones, so they have to repeat things. And I was like, "Oh, that's an interesting like way of thinking about it." And I hadn't even considered that would make a change in how people make films or movies. But okay, so you've done your documentaries, and now you want to do fiction and feature film sort of way. How's the transition into that? How did you come up with the idea for that film, and how did you get the money for it?
Well, the idea was that, I had done this series for Indian television, and I had faced a lot of. In the beginning, it was great sailing, fantastic, everything went well. And then at one point, the top executives on the television show were changed. They retired, and new guys came in. And suddenly they started interfering in, this somehow there's this human, it's a very human thing that somebody else had asked this project to be done. So the new guy kind of tries to put his finger in it and fool around with it. And they started censoring it. They didn't want certain things to be shown in a certain way, all that kind of stuff. And eventually there was even a certain kind of corruption which kind of was suggested, which I refused. And therefore, things became very complicated to continue to make that series. And I finally managed to, stop it. And I stopped making films for that television channel. But those experiences left me pretty angry. So I said, let me kind of translate that into a fiction film. And of course, it's not a tragedy what I lived through. So I thought I'll make it a satire. So I made a satire. It's called Chai Pani, etc., which means love, bribes, etc. That's the English title is Love, Bribes, etc. And it's basically the story of a young filmmaker trying to make a film for a television company, and the censorship and the corruption he faces, plus all the other problems of trying to make a film when in a place where sometimes he himself is incompetent and the people he is working with are incompetent. So the whole thing is it's a bit of a mess. So it's a coming of age come satire of film. And the film was so that was a basic idea. So basically it has a lot of autobiographical elements, but it has also many things which I had observed with other filmmakers around me, what they were facing. And so it's a fiction. So you kind of add stuff and you kind of make up stuff, and you take some real stuff and you mix it with fiction. And you have to make people laugh, so you kind of exaggerate sometimes things. And sometimes the reality itself is so funny that you don't have to exaggerate anything. Though at the moment you are actually going through it, living through it, it may not be funny, but when you look at it a few years later, it becomes funny.
Yeah.
And so, so that was the basis. And then I just wrote it the way it came to me. I looked at a few books on script writing, but I didn't really study script. I mean, I had studied script writing in film school and all that, but I had never really become a script writer, fiction script writer, which is a very specific kind of writing. But I just wrote it down and I managed to get something on paper. And then I kind of went in the typical. I studied also the filmmakers, American filmmakers especially, I admired, and the way they went about looking for money, which is, for example, the Coen brothers. I'm a great fan of their work, and I know that they grew up in Minnesota, and their parents were doctors, and so they had gone all over the state to meet doctors to kind of raise money to make their first film, and they had been quite successful. So I did the similar kind of a thing. I went all over, friends and family, of course, first, and then they led to other people, etc., etc. And slowly, slowly, I kind of made a little. I had a little amount of money to make the film. I had zero idea about the industry and the marketing and all that. I just thought very naively that, if I make a good film, people will buy it and it'll be shown in the cinemas. But unfortunately, that's not how the business works.
It's not how
It's a much more, it's a, as you said before, it's a very, and in India in those days, it was extremely closed kind of old boys network to get a film on distribution. And there was a lot of corruption, even though my subject was corruption and censorship. And people, when I made the film, people laughed. It went to festivals. It even won an award in a festival. But when I showed it to the distributors in Bombay, they said, "There's no song, there's no dance." I said, "It's an independent film. It doesn't have the usual. It's not a Bollywood film. It's an independent film." And but they said, "It's partly in English, and it's not in Hindi, which is the majority language in North India." So I said, yes, but there's a market for that in the all the big cities. Everyone speaks English in India with different accents. Like my accent is very different from, let's say, a South Indian or a East Indian, but it's English, and everyone in India understands it, and probably in America also. I don't know, but the thing is that the distributors just were couldn't figure out how to distribute that film. So I finally ended up with my assistant director. We distributed the film directly ourselves. And I was a little bit inspired by some American filmmakers who had started doing that, the DIY. If nothing works, then you have to do it yourself. And so I had a very good relationship with my lab, which was in Chennai, which is really the opposite side of India, really South India, very far from Delhi. But they just sent, we organized it. I was on the phone with them. I would call the lab guy. He would send the prints to 12 different cities all over India, and it worked very well. And I didn't have much money for marketing. That was the big problem. How could I raise my investors? My initial investors kind of started chickening out when the actual distribution happened. They thought this is not going to happen, nothing's going to happen, and they're going to lose all their money. So they kind of chickened out. So which actually was a very negative thing for me, because I didn't have enough to do the marketing. I did manage to still raise some money, but it wasn't enough to actually, when you put a film on a screen, you're actually competing with maybe 10 or 15 other films which are coming out that same day and that same week, and the movie has to do well during the first 2 weeks, otherwise it's dead. Sometimes, I mean, now it's even worse. It has to do well in the first weekend, otherwise it's dead. So it has to be pushed, and there has to be enough money, enough PR, enough marketing around the film so that it kind of exists, so that the people know and have heard about it. So that I kind of was learning it as I was doing it. I mean, I did the whole thing myself. I had my assistant director, just the two of us. We were on the thing, and I must say he was a fantastic help. There was no money in it. I mean, I had put all my savings and all that, but I had also got a lot of my family members to put the money. So I was doing my best to try and get some of it back, which I did partly. But still, I wasn't able to get back all the money. and I actually should have got it because the film was released in actually in 15 cities, and it did pretty okay. I mean, didn't do very well because there was no money to market it. But then when I went to Bombay to sell it, and in India, the television studios are all in Bombay, that's where I faced the most, I mean, the basically the corruption which was there. You had an agent. He said, "Look, I'll buy your film for X. Take it or leave it." And that X was so low that I could not take that deal. And then there was no way. He was the only buyer, and that was it. And in those days, you didn't have Netflix, you didn't have Amazon, you didn't have any other options. Today, the situation is different. There are more options, but it's more or less the same kind of a thing. I think there are more options. It's probably a little less corrupt because there's not that monopoly, but still it's a very, very tough market, and you have to. The biggest lesson I learned from that, and I would encourage every budding young filmmaker to do that, is to actually have your when you do your financing, you have to have your marketing budget in place at the same time as your production budget. There's
Mm,
no one's going to come in, no one's going to come in, even if you make the best film ever. The business is structured in that way that no one's going to come in and take your film and then suddenly you become Spielberg. No, that's not going to happen. So,
um,
which is what every filmmaker dreams of.
yeah. You mentioned the film festivals. I always hear things about, oh, this festival, that festival, this filmmaker sent their short film to this, there's awards. What actually is it? Because in my head, I was like, oh, do these people sit around for all day and just watch movies? Because that would take a lot of time if each one's like an hour or whatever. You could only get through so many in a day. But like, how do they work?
Well, film festivals are a wonderful institutions which are made by people who love movies and who basically do the promotion for the films for free. So if you are selected, let's say in one of the big five, which is Cannes Film Festival, Venice, Sundance, Berlin, and Toronto. Those are the big five. If your film is selected by one of them, and that's like extremely difficult to get in, it's like one in 7,000 films which are sent gets in. So it's like really tough. Then your career can really be made because being selected in one of those festivals is, and it's like the holy grail. It is very difficult to get in, and one cannot and should not base one's business plan on that. There has to be another alternative because it's a very long shot. And these places are these big five festivals. If you can, I mean, that's what one should aim for. There are other festivals, and many of them, which can help if you're, let's say, supposing you have made a film which is set in a certain area or of a certain genre, then you can, show your film over there. It gets you press, publicity, and then you can release. Maybe you can get a distributor sometimes. So it's a whole, there has to be a strategy about how to go about selling, I mean, bringing your film to the audience. And the festivals are one way for a certain kind of films to
Mm.
reach their audiences.
So how does that path work then? Because it's not like you're gonna send like, I don't know, Iron Man to some
No,
festival. Like they've
they don't
got the
need.
right, so they don't need it. But how does the path work from you go to a festival and somebody sees it, and then what is the distribution like from that perspective? Because at least now, like I don't think a lot of people are going to the movie theater at this point. But if you do well, if like it's received well at a festival, then what like where does it get distributed? Like how does that work?
Well, I don't know if I mean it depends where in the world, but in India definitely, and in France even, people are going a lot to the festivals. I don't know
Okay,
how
that might be
how
an American
maybe
thing then,
in the
because
US
people just streaming stuff now at home.
people have got used to after the COVID. I think a lot of people have got used to sitting at home and watching movies on their screens at home through streaming and other screens. But the experience of a big screen in a very big hall with other people, and it's part of actually going out for dinner, and it's part of leisure activities. So that experience still is on the big screen. And uh, let's say there are films which are commercially very successful and they are made by the big studios. There are very expensive films. Those films actually don't need festivals and they are not made for festivals. They aim at very large audiences. And I'm talking especially the kind of films you mentioned, which is Iron Man, which is, a studio picture, and those are really very, very big blockbuster movies. But a lot of the independent films, those need festivals because they cater to a smaller niche audiences, which are who are interested in more, I would say, artistic or personal cinema, and therefore they need the recognition and the publicity given by these festivals. So you basically have these. I mean, it's a very broad kind of classification. You have the big studio, commercial, broad comedies, and very, big movies, very expensive movies with big stars and all. Big stars don't need festivals. The festivals need the big stars. It's the other way around. If George Clooney goes to Sundance, Sundance is very happy. But George Clooney, when he was just a television guy, television star, he went to Sundance. Well, not a big deal. So it depends. The movie business is very. It diff- every film is different, and it requires a different approach. I've written a rom com. A rom com, I don't think it's going to go to. I mean, it may go to a few festivals which are specialized in comedy or in rom-coms, but it won't go to the big unless it's a very quirky kind of a rom-com, and that can work sometimes. And sometimes I try to do that. But if I'm aiming at a slightly larger audience, and it's a more mainstream kind of a film, then you don't need to go to an audience. You can go straight. I mean, you need to go to an audience, but you don't need to go to a festival.
Mm,
You, because what end of the day, your film has to be able to make enough money and a profit for your investors so that you can make your next film.
gotcha. Okay, so you got lowballed by the agent, and you're doing the DIY marketing yourself with your
Yeah.
assistant director. And so what happens after this? So the film does, you said it did okay. Then what happens after that? I mean, I would imagine maybe a bit discouraged, but you still keep going. So what, walk me through the next kind of the idea
Well,
for the next film, how you came up with it, or just the next kind of step in your journey.
well, I had like a double. I mean, the movie did not do so well, not enough to be able to make a profit and pay back even all the money to my investors. So that was a tough thing to take on. But then I had a personal tragedy in my family also. And so that kind of put me back a bit. And then I decided with my wife to move to Paris because I found that Bombay was basically not India, but the the movie business in Bombay, I found it too difficult for the kind of films I wanted to make. I did not want to make Bollywood, it's not my sensibility. It did not suit me. So I thought, let me try my luck in my other country, which is France, and my wife is French, so I kind of moved there. And so I tried my luck there, and there it was even more difficult, which was a very tough thing because, I thought I'd made a feature film. I'd already made 10 documentaries. Some of them had got awards. So I thought, the industry in France would kind of look at me favorably. But no, no, not at all. I was basically an outsider coming into a closed, very closed world. And I don't know if Hollywood is closed, but I think the French industry is ultra closed. And so it's been a very tough struggle to, slowly meet people, get to know people, show them your work. Also, the writing. But the process, it's a process. A filmmaking and art generally is a very long process. So since I could not produce or direct fiction films, I kept making documentaries. I was moving anyway between India and France, so I kept doing my documentaries. But I also learned the art of script writing. And so I did classes with French script writers, but also online with American script writers. So I kept learning and writing during all these for about 10 years. I was writing scripts of all kinds. And so now, and making these documentary films, other documentary films on architecture. And then I made a film which was very successful in the documentary, architecture documentary, which is a specific kind of documentary, which was on Corbusier, Le Corbusier, who's a very famous French Swiss architect who made certain buildings in India. So I made a film on that, which was bought, which I was able to sell to all the US Ivy League universities, and then I made a film on uh, other buildings in India, palaces, etc., and also on my father's work, who by then had become much more well known. And so a very established museum, one of the world's actually biggest museums in the world, which is the Pompidou Center in Paris. I made a deal with them that they don't have much money, but they do have equipment, and they have people, very competent people who can help in the graphics. And so I kind of made deals with them so that I did the shooting in India, and there was a big exhibition on my father's work which was happening over there in the Museum of Modern Art in New Delhi. So I got some money from there to shoot some of his work. And then I did a deal with the French guys where they didn't have money, but they had equipment. So, I managed somehow to get the whole thing together, and made another 2 hour film and on his work, which was again quite successful, and which I've been able to again sell all over the world. So I was doing these documentaries, and then I was learning really script writing, and now I have come to a stage where I have four scripts, feature film scripts, which are ready. And, different projects are at different stages. And, the movie business is, at one point, I had a very famous British producer who was a guy who had made like 50 films, Nick Powell, very famous guy, who used to be Branson's partner. The guy, he actually created Virgin with Branson.
Oh wow.
And at some point, and then they separated. He became a film producer. Branson did many other things, but Nick was a fantastic, really funny British guy, and he wanted to produce one of my films, but unfortunately, just before the COVID, he died, and so the
Oh
movie
no.
stopped dead at that point. And then COVID happened, so that blocked everything for a few years. But now that film suddenly, I mean, 2 months ago, it's taken off. And suddenly there's finance in India for that film. I was talking to a producer yesterday, actually, in France. He's also interested in it. So it's also timing. You write a story and you think this is the time to make it, but then the market and life happens. So,
Yeah. You
that's
mentioned obviously you need to talk and make relationships with lots of people in lots of
yeah.
different areas of things. What are some of the things that you've learned about navigating through the different industries, whether it's the Indian kind of Bollywood side or the French side or the American side about I need equipment or I need money, I need funding, I need actors. Like how have you learned to navigate through all these things? And obviously people talk as well. So like, oh, don't talk to that guy because he'll stab you in the back, or don't talk to this guy, or you should talk to that guy. So you have to like build up a reputation for yourself as well. What are some of the things
Well,
that you've learned navigating through all of that?
I think the best is honesty is still the best policy, and simplicity. And I simply try to be as clear, as honest, and straight as possible. And generally, most of the time, you meet people who are like you, and and most people are in the business to to earn their living also. And so if things are said in a clear, simple way, and they can give you sometimes, you have to work around in a smart way, solutions. Like, for example, I know as a student, sometimes we would be able to get a camera for free on weekends because they were not being rent out at that time, or on holidays, or you know same thing for if you want a location, like I want to shoot in a palace, and if I go at the height of the tourist season, they're not going to give me the permission to shoot over there. But if I go in a season where there's no one going to visit that particular place at that point, they say, okay, take it for 2 days, and you pay us X amount, and maybe you even give it for free. And if you beg enough and you convince them that your film is going to promote their building and make more tourists come to see it, then they may give it to you for free. So you have to find the arguments to convince people, and in a very rational, simple way, straightforward way. And you say, listen, if you don't give me your palace, I'm going to the next palace. So, you know, that's that's always there. So they also look at the advantage they're getting out of it. So it's a basic common sense, like in any business. And but I really believe in the honest way of working, whether you're working with your technicians, the people who work with you and who make the film with you, or with investors. Everybody, like right now, I'm trying to get a science fiction. It's a science fiction rom-com, remarriage comedy. And this is most science fiction is a kind of a dystopian story, very dark. Things are going to be really bad in the future. We are all going to suffer even more than today. So I thought it'd be more fun to do something where it's a comedy. The future is going to be even sillier than today. And therefore, what to do. And one of the genres which I really love is the old American screwball comedies. And in those are remarriage comedies with Gary Cooper and all that. And they were really well made, and they laid the basis for the whole Hollywood film industry, because they were and the way they showed women, those women were really the driving force in those films, and they were very modern. And this is in the 30s, 40s in the US. And so those are really very interesting, fun films. And so I thought I'll combine those traditional films with science fiction and AI and what's going to happen tomorrow in the future. And but I'm interested in the near future, not in like millions of years, in
Yeah.
what's going to happen in 10 years from now. Because after that, I don't know if I will be around. So I'm more interested. I want to see what happens next. And so I kind of combine these things, the wonder and the imagination linked to science fiction, with the comedy of human men and women, that's like a non-ending comedy. It's a or a tragedy, depends on your point of view.
Yeah.
But I prefer to look at it as a comedy because it has that potential. And comedy is a way of looking at the world, uh, and so is tragedy. So I like to look at the positive, or the silly side of it, and that makes even something very difficult, very tragic, kind of makes you accept it in a in a in a better way. And I think spiritually, it's a higher thing than tragedy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
It brings light to people a bit more,
yeah.
gives people some joy. Um, if people are interested in learning more about your work, where should they go find you or some of your films and if they want to watch them and that sort of thing?
Well, I've put many of my films. I've put them on Vimeo. So my I've given you, I think, some of the links and
Hmm.
direct links to them, and then on Vimeo, they're all many of them are there. So that's I think that's the best way to see them.
Okay.
And
You have a
yeah.
website or anywhere specific that they can go find? So I'll put all the links in the description, of course, but is there anywhere else that people should know about?
Well, there's my website, which is Manu Rewal, ManuRewal.com. And so that has all my films, except for the most recent, which I've not yet put on the website. But that's, but most of them are there. And so that's the thing. And of course, I can be contacted also if there are some people interested in my work. I'm always looking for investors who are interested in Indian and French and like world cinema, because I'm not linked to a very specific. I think my films are appreciated everywhere, wherever they may be seen. And since it's often in English, I think it can work very well in the US. I show some of my films were shown in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale Film Festival, and the audience's response. The audience response is the same everywhere in the world. So you get to know very quickly, especially when it's a comedy, whether people are laughing or not.
Yeah, that's
That's
true. That's
then
true.
whether you start crying or whether you laugh with them. So that's
Do you have any other subjects or any other thoughts that you want to touch on before we get you out of here? I know we're a little bit over the time that we agreed on, but do you have anything else that you want to talk about?
Yeah, actually there's one thing which there's one more project which I'm doing right now, which is a thriller, and it's actually based on the something which happened to a friend of mine. This is very different from my other films. This one is it's actually a friend of mine who is an Iranian philosopher who was locked up by the regime, the current regime. They locked him up in prison in 2006. He was very lucky because his mother and his wife somehow managed to get him out, and he came to India. He's an old friend of mine, and then he wrote a book about his experience in that. So I wrote a script based on that, which is a thriller. It's a fiction. It's based on his experience, but then I added elements of what I knew about that regime and how it functions and all that. But it's a fiction, and so that is a film I'm trying to make right now, and I'm looking for also investors and people who would be interested, because it is something to do with freedom, the rule of law, democracy. And I think somehow that has become, it's not an Iranian story anymore. It's not just an Iranian story. It's an Indian story. It's an American story. Even a French story now. Because all over the world, all the democracies are under pressure. And so I think it's a very topical subject, and um, I'm looking for investment, producers, distributors, anybody who would be interested in collaborating on a film on this subject.
Okay, very nice. Well, if somebody of that stature or profession happens to stumble upon this, you should go to his website and contact him.
Yes.
Um, awesome, awesome, awesome. When do you have potential release dates for either of these films, or just they're still early stage?
No, no, at this stage, we are at the funding stage, financing stage. So I'm hoping that by next year, one of them will see will come to the screen, but we have to first make the film. And then, a film usually takes about a year to make. So then, depending on if it's a rom-com, I'd love to get it released next year by February for the what's it called, the
Valentine's
festival.
Day.
That's it. For Valentine's Day, a rom-com is the right. That's the right time to release a rom-com, even in India. Uh, and this is the funny thing that the world culture, the American culture especially, has been imbibed everywhere in the world that, and probably because of the movies.
Yeah,
That's how, I mean, movies and rock and roll and comics, probably that's the three great arts of which have been developed in the US and which the whole world loves.
yeah,
So,
yeah. Movies, rock and roll, comedy, or
and
yeah,
comics,
comedians and
comic,
comics. Yeah,
comic,
yeah. I
I
think
think
so. I think
they have
so.
been, yeah.
Any last nickels before we get you out of here?
Well, I don't know. You have any questions about anything I can talk about?
I don't
I
know. I
believe
think
so.
we've covered a lot. I think we've covered a lot. I've learned a lot. I've got a lot to think about for sure. Some of the podcasts that I have where I learned so much that now I'm just processing, and so my brain is kind of turned off from questions. But I think no, I really appreciate your time, and for people listening, go check out his website and the movies and the films. I'll put the links in the description as always. And hope you enjoyed it. And if you're obviously interested in contacting him, go to the website and I'm sure there's contact forms and things down there.
Yeah.
But hope you
Okay.
guys enjoyed it, and we will see you guys next time. Peace.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the World XP podcast. If you want to watch another episode like this one, click there. If you want to subscribe, click there.